On a hushed autumn evening in the White House, a letter arrived for Donald Trump, its presence as unexpected as a whisper in a storm. The envelope was pristine, its heavy paper embossed with the Vatican's iconic seal. An aide delivered it directly to the president, retreating without a word, as if the letter carried a gravity that demanded solitude. In the dim light of the Oval Office, Trump turned the envelope over in his hands, curiosity laced with a faint unease. He broke the seal and unfolded the single sheet within. The handwriting was meticulous, yet warm, unmistakably penned by Pope Francis himself. "Dear President Trump," it read, "I humbly invite you to the Vatican for a private conversation, one unburdened by ceremony or the gaze of the world. I seek only an honest exchange, a moment of truth between us. Should you accept, my office will ensure all arrangements are made discreetly." Trump sat back, the letter resting in his hands like a puzzle he hadn't anticipated. He had met Pope Francis before stiff diplomatic encounters filled with calculated smiles and rehearsed words, but this was different. It was personal, raw, almost urgent. He read it again, the simplicity of the words stirring something he couldn't quite name. This wasn't a political maneuver or a public relations stunt. It was a summons to something deeper, something he hadn't faced in years. He reached for the phone and dialed his chief of staff. "Get this set up with the Vatican," he said, his voice steady but resolute. "No press, no cameras, no noise. Just make it happen quietly." The arrangements unfolded swiftly, with a secrecy that left even his closest aides intrigued but uninformed. Days later, Trump boarded Air Force One under a crisp morning sky, the absence of reporters or public fanfare leaving an unusual calm. His staff exchanged glances, sensing the weight of the unknown. Trump, however, spent the flight in silence, staring out at the endless horizon, his mind wrestling with what the Pope might want. Was it policy, faith, something else entirely? The possibilities churned, but none felt right. This journey, he sensed, was leading him into uncharted waters, unsettling, yet strangely grounding. In Rome, the Vatican arranged for him to stay in a modest guest house, nestled among the tranquil gardens of Vatican City. The simplicity was jarring. No opulent halls, no ceremonial pomp, just a quiet reverence that seemed to hum in the air. Trump found himself pausing in the garden, the scent of rosemary and the distant chime of bells grounding him in a way he hadn't expected. Late that afternoon, a soft knock came at the door. A young priest stood there, his demeanor calm and respectful. "His Holiness is ready, Mr. President," he said. Trump nodded and followed, his footsteps echoing faintly through stone corridors and past blooming courtyards until they reached a small room in the Apostolic Palace. The room was unassuming, its tall windows spilling soft sunlight across polished wooden floors and simple furnishings. Pope Francis stood by one of the windows, gazing out at the gardens, his white cassock catching the light. He turned as Trump entered, his face warm, open, devoid of pretense or judgment. They shook hands, the Pope's grip firm yet gentle, his eyes holding Trump's for a moment longer than expected, a silent acknowledgement of the moment's weight. "Thank you for coming," Francis said, his voice soft but resonant, as he gestured to two plain chairs arranged across from each other. They sat, and for a moment, silence enveloped them, heavy with possibility. Francis seemed at ease in the quiet, his hands folded calmly in his lap, as if gathering the right words. Then, with a clarity that cut through the stillness, he spoke. "I have watched you," he began, "not as a leader or a public figure, but as a man. I see you in your speeches, in your silences, in the way you carry yourself before others. I see a man weighed down by expectations, some from the world, but many from within." Trump shifted slightly, caught off guard. He had braced for a discussion of global issues or moral critiques, not this piercingly personal observation. The Pope's voice remained steady, kind, but unrelenting. Leadership is a heavy mantle, but its true burden lies not in power or decisions. It lies in knowing who you serve or not as president, not as a name in history, but as Donald Trump, the man. The words landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples through Trump's thoughts. He felt exposed, yet not judged. "Let me ask you," Francis continued, leaning forward just enough to close the distance between them, "who do you serve, Donald Trump? Not the office, not the nation, but you, in your heart. Who are you truly for?" The question hung in the air, gentle yet unyielding, stripping away the layers of titles, achievements, and public personas. Trump swallowed, a rare vulnerability creeping in. "I serve my country," he said, his voice quieter than usual, tinged with uncertainty. Francis smiled, his eyes warm with understanding. "Of course you do, but beyond that, deeper still, when all titles are gone, when the world is silent, who do you serve?" Trump fell silent, the question slicing through decades of noise-suppressed conferences, negotiations, endless scrutiny. This wasn't a question for a soundbite or a crowd. It was for him alone, demanding a reckoning he hadn't faced in years. He looked down at his hands, searching for an answer, but none came. "You don't need to answer now," Francis said softly, his voice a balm. "Sometimes the question itself is the gift. It asks us to look where we've avoided." The conversation shifted, flowing into quieter waters. They spoke of their past moments of pride that blinded them, times they felt unseen, the cost of ambition's relentless pull. It was raw, unguarded, a dialogue stripped of agenda or expectation. Trump found himself sharing stories he hadn't revisited in years, childhood memories, early struggles, moments of doubt he'd buried under success. Francis listened, nodding, offering his own stories of humility and lessons learned in obscurity. It was a conversation unlike any Trump had known, a rare moment of two men, leaders in their own right, meeting not as icons but as humans. As the sunlight began to fade, casting long shadows across the room, Francis stood, signaling the end of their time. "Carry this question with you," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Let it live in you. The answers come slowly, but they come in their own time." Trump rose, shaking the Pope's hand, the weight of the moment settling into his bone. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice catching slightly. I think this was something I needed." Francis placed a hand on his shoulder, his touch steady. "We all need it sometimes," he said. "Go in peace." Trump walked back through the gardens, the evening air cool against his skin. The conversation replayed in his mind, each word a thread pulling at something deep within. His steps felt different, lighter, as if unburdened, yet heavier with a new awareness. The Pope's quiet presence, his unassuming wisdom, had stirred something Trump couldn't ignore. On the flight back to Washington, he sat in silence, the hum of Air Force One, A distant backdrop. Rome receded below, but the question, "Who do you truly serve?" remained, echoing like a heartbeat. It wasn't like the countless questions he'd deflected in interviews or debates. This one demanded truth, not performance. Back at the White House, his team noticed a subtle shift. He stepped off the plane more slowly, his usual bravado replaced by quiet nods. That evening, he bypassed his routine of scanning news or social media, instead wandering the residence halls, pausing by a window to gaze at the illuminated grounds. The view, once a symbol of triumph, now felt humbler, more fragile, as if he were seeing it through new eyes. The question lingered, weaving itself into every thought. The next morning, briefings resumed, but Trump's focus wavered. He was quieter, more measured, pausing before responding to advisors. His staff assumed it was jet lag, unaware of the internal shift reshaping him. The question followed him through meetings, in quiet moments, in the stillness of late nights when the White House felt like a sleeping giant. One evening, Ivanka visited, her presence a comfort in the dimly lit residence. "You seem different," she said gently, her eyes searching his. "What's going on?" He hesitated, then opened up. "I met with the Pope. He asked me who I'm truly serving, not as president, but as me. I didn't know what to say. I'm still trying to figure it out." Ivanka reached for his hand, her touch grounding. "Maybe that's why he asked," she said. "Some questions aren't for answering right away, they're for searching." Her words settled over him, a quiet permission to wrestle with the unknown. Over the following days, Trump's approach began to change. In meetings, he listened more intently, interrupting less, asking questions that sought understanding rather than dominance. His advisors noticed, exchanging puzzled glances as he probed deeper, seeking their perspectives with a sincerity that felt new. At a press briefing, a reporter picked up on the shift. "Mr. President, you seem different lately. Has something changed?" Trump paused, his gaze steady. "I had a conversation that made me think," he said, his voice uncharacteristically reflective. "Leading isn't just about making decisions or getting headlines. It's about listening, really listening, even when you think you've got it all figured out." The room fell silent, pens scratching furiously as journalists captured the rare moment of candor. That night, Trump pulled out a leather-bound notebook he rarely used, its pages mostly blank. At the top of a fresh page, he wrote the Pope's question in careful script. "Who do you truly serve?" Not as president, but as Donald Trump. Below, he began listing names not of dignitaries or power brokers, but of the unseen. Groundskeepers, security guards, kitchen staff, cleaners. As he wrote, a quiet shame settled over him. These were the people who kept the White House running, yet he knew almost nothing about them, their names, their stories, their struggles. The realization stung, a reminder of how often he'd looked past the ordinary in pursuit of the extraordinary. The next morning, he surprised his chief of staff with an unusual request. Arrange a lunch with the White House's lower-level staff maintenance workers, cooks, housekeepers. The aide blinked, confused, but complied. The lunch was held in a modest dining room, the long table surrounded by a dozen nervous employees, their eyes wide at the president's presence. Trump smiled, his demeanor warm, disarming. "Tell me about yourselves," he said simply. "Your families, your lives, what's it like for you?" The room hesitated, then slowly opened. They shared stories of early morning commutes, children's dreams, financial strains that kept them awake at night. Trump listened, his usual restlessness replaced by a quiet focus, each story painting a picture of lives he'd never truly seen. One housekeeper, Rosa, spoke hesitantly. "I clean your office every night, Mr. President," she said, her voice soft but steady. "I pray for you while I work, for your strength and wisdom." Trump's throat tightened, her words cutting through his defenses. "Thank you, Rosa," he said, his voice catching. "I didn't know, but I do now." The lunch stretched on, the room warming with shared laughter and stories. As it ended, Trump quietly instructed his chief of staff to explore better benefits for the staff: transportation assistance, child care support, modest wage adjustments. "No press," he added firmly. "This isn't for show." The actions were small, unnoticed by the world, but they carried a weight that felt profound. In his notebook that evening, Trump wrote, "Maybe I serve best when I see others clearly, when I notice the ones nobody else does." The words felt like a revelation, a quiet truth he hadn't grasped before. That night, he slept with a peace he hadn't known in years, not the fleeting satisfaction of a deal closed or a headline won, but a deeper calm, born of purpose rather than power. Over the weeks, the ripples of his change spread. Staff began receiving handwritten notes from the president, brief but sincere, thanking them for their unseen work. Policies shifted subtly, with new initiatives to support veterans, single parents, and low-income families. Changes that didn't make front pages but transformed lives in quiet ways. Whispers moved through the White House corridors, not through official channels but in shared glances and hushed conversations. The staff felt seen, their work acknowledged in ways that mattered. In a cabinet meeting, Trump did something unprecedented. Instead of diving into policy or strategy, he began by asking each member about their families, their personal challenges. The room stilled, the formality giving way to genuine responses. One secretary shared a worry about a sick parent. Another spoke of a child struggling in school. The openness was new, fragile, but real, transforming the meeting into a space of connection rather than calculation. Later, Vice President JD Vance pulled him aside. "What's different, sir?" he asked. Trump paused, then answered, "I used to think leading meant having all the answers. Now I see it's about asking the right questions and actually hearing the answers." A private note arrived from the Vatican, written in Francis's familiar hand. "Leadership shines brightest when it serves those who cannot repay. Hold this truth close." Trump tucked it into his notebook, alongside the growing pages of reflections, questions, and quiet resolutions. The note was a reminder, a beacon guiding him through the noise of his role. One evening, Rosa returned, standing nervously in the Oval Office doorway. She had come to thank him, not just for the support her family in Guatemala had received, but for something deeper. "You saw us," she said, tears brimming. "You made us feel like we matter. That changed how we see ourselves." Trump's chest tightened, her words echoing the Pope's question. "You changed me, Rosa," he said sincerely. "You showed me what leading really means, not just speaking, but seeing." As she left, he sat alone, the weight of her gratitude settling into him. Trump began sharing his experience more openly, but still privately, with trusted advisors and select colleagues in Congress. He spoke not of politics, but of humility, of noticing the overlooked, of the question that had reshaped him. Reactions varied: curiosity, skepticism, quiet, all but a new tone emerged. A senator, once a fierce opponent, sent a handwritten note. Your words reminded me why I chose this path. Thank you for the reminder. Another Vatican note arrived, brief but powerful. Keep listening. This is how leadership grows. The changes weren't always visible to the public. Trump's presidency retained its bold exterior trade deals, foreign policy, economic pushes, but those closest to him saw the shift. He listened with intention, acted with care, chose compassion over spectacle. In quiet moments, he returned to his notebook, its pages now filled with reflections on gratitude, humility, and the people he'd once overlooked. One entry read, "Power is loud, but compassion is quiet. It's the quiet that lasts." Months later, during a routine event, a young staffer approached him, hesitant but determined. "Mr. President," she said, "I heard about what you did for the staff. It's changed how we work here. We feel valued." Trump smiled, a rare softness in his eyes. "You're the ones who keep this place running," he said. "I'm just catching up." The exchange was brief, unnoticed by the press, but it carried a weight that lingered. One late night, Ivanka stopped by, finding him with his notebook open. "Did the Pope's question give you an answer?" she asked gently. Trump looked up, his expression thoughtful. "Not one answer," he said. "It gave me a way to live. It's not about knowing who I serve, it's about learning to serve better every day." Ivanka nodded, her smile warm with pride. "That's more than most people ever find," she said. The final page of his notebook held a single sentence written in the quiet of a late night. "Leadership isn't the noise we make, it's the compassion we choose when no one's watching. This is what Pope Francis showed me, and it's the only legacy that matters." Closing the book, Trump felt a profound peace. The Pope hadn't given him a doctrine or a directive, but a path, a quiet call to serve, to see, to listen. It was a legacy not of headlines or monuments, but of small, unseen acts that wove through the lives of those he touched. As his presidency continued, the ripples grew. Staff moved with lighter steps, their work infused with purpose. Colleagues softened, inspired by his quiet example. Policies shifted to uplift the forgotten, their impact felt in homes far from Washington's glare. And in the Vatican, Pope Francis received word of the changes, a faint smile crossing his face as he whispered a prayer for the man who had listened. For Donald Trump, the question, "Who do you truly serve?" had become more than words. It was a way of being, a quiet legacy that would outlast power, softly transformative, forever enduring.